Andrew, I'm sorry, Homer and Anthony. Sorry, guys, I'm still catching up on sleep from the last few weeks. But thanks, guys, for persevering in the course. We are now entering week 7. You got 2 more weeks. And I realize for you, Anthony, you got a lot going on. So if you need another week or two to finish out the work, that's fine. Just a quick advertisement regarding the next class, which is going to be going back further into the work on multiplying disciples and multiplying groups with a look of how we can make that kind of a cultural transition and even to say leap in our churches here in the Central California area. So I'm looking forward to that study. But just to share with you, men, that's going to begin August 2nd. So basically, we've got the month of July off. And so just that little bit of reprieve before we go on to the third course that's going to be presented this fall, starting in August. So we'll go 8 weeks for that course and 8 weeks in the last course, which is a preaching course at the end of the year. And we'll be all wrapped up before December, but wrapping up that last week of Thanksgiving for the second the second course in the fall and the fourth and final course for the year. This week, you start Edersheim, and you're going through the first 110 pages of Edersheim. Edersheim is going to be much richer to say in knowledge content and just to say it that way than what Lee and Black, the text, posed. So with Edersheim, you'll be getting into Platonic outlook and philosophy, some things about Plato. You'll get into the Apocrypha and why that was written. He explains this in these first 100 pages as it was a fill-in for those 400 years coming with Hellenism influencing things and trying to answer from a Jewish perspective those 400 years and filling in the gap. Very interesting reading. Then you'll go on to stuff about Alexandria and other things that'll be very interesting reading this week as you get into Edersheim. You're not going to be reading all of Edersheim. I think Edersheim is actually over 1,000 pages of the original text. And I appreciate Anthony getting the PDF copy out to us. Well, I guess this big one only goes up to about 800 pages. But that said, your last and final discussion board topic is going to come out of Timothy. And my plan is to use 1 Timothy, I think it's 3 and 4, and then come back to 2 Timothy 2 about the principles of pastoring, the principal qualifiers and conditions and qualifications for pastoring, and then the practices of pastoring, especially as it's surfaced in 2 Corinthians 2. So I will create that and put that up with this YouTube, your discussion board 4. So you're going to post a discussion board 4 this week, your initial thoughts to that topic, and then week 8, we respond to one another regarding that discussion board. So during this week, you're reading through the pastoral epistles. You did complete Thessalonians last week. So we're 1 Timothy all the way to Jude. The only thing left of your New Testament reading will be the book of Revelation next week. So that's it. And these writings of Paul, as he's finishing out his life, he writes 1 Timothy in the imprisonment that's being talked about in Acts 28. It's about AD 62. He is released. He goes on to do his fourth missionary journey to Spain, and comes back around, comes back into Rome. I apologize, guys. Sorry so much. But then he is imprisoned for the final time and writes Second Timothy, and that's where he is anticipating his martyrdom. So that's First and Second Timothy. Then you'll have Titus, and the qualifications there is, if you've read the book T4T that was released in 2010, talking about the 1,700,000 conversions, I think it was, in a 10-year period of time in China somewhere. That's all we know, Southeast Asia, through this Southern Baptist missionary couple, Li Kai was his name, and but he writes the T4T along with David. I think his name was David Smith. But they report what God does in 10 years' time. It's totally just a house church mainly type movement of doing Great Commandment work, Great Commission work in 2 Timothy 2:2. Again, we're going to get into this, studying it more, the applications, how this would look like for us to intentionally go in that direction here for Central California, our Southern Baptist churches, in this course starting in August. But the Titus qualifications are just a bit different than what Paul writes to Timothy in 1 Timothy 3. They made the observation in T4T, that book, that Timothy was more of a larger church situation there at Ephesus. Titus is smaller churches, and it's not as large each church and not as developed as far as their church governance. And so the qualifiers for serving as a pastor are a little bit different, and they make that distinction as to why they are different in 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1 for serving as a pastor. So you'll want to watch that as you get in and reading those books. Then Philemon, the slave owner, that Onesimus was his slave, and he escapes and then winds up in Paul's influence and becomes a Christian. And Paul writes back to Philemon to receive Onesimus back. Then we go into Hebrews, and that 13 chapter study, as you did your discussion board 3 topic on chapter 12. But those 13 chapters are addressing the people in and around Jerusalem just before probably the 70, 75. I'm not giving you more specific dates, but for about a 3-year period, it was ransacked by the Romans. And you can watch YouTubes on this that are very interesting, what took place and who went in there and actually did that devastation of Jerusalem. Then they worked their way out to Masada. I would encourage you to watch some YouTubes on Masada. It was the last holdout of the Jews that remained and escaped to that hideout place that Herod had built. And I got to visit that in 1980 when I was a student at Liberty Seminary. They actually gave us a free trip over to the Holy Land. And they took us to Masada. ABC, I think it was, had just done this documentary before we got there in 1980 about Masada. But the whole ramp, it was made by human slaves. Romans had used Jewish slaves to build that ramp all the way to the top. And it's just quite an amazing story. But we were told when we were there in 1980 that in all the Israeli schools, I think it was the 5th grade, they teach Israeli children the motto and the story behind Masada, but the motto is Masada will not fall again, meaning their homeland as Jews, they will, by the grace of God, never give it up again. And if you've watched any of the, to say again, YouTubes, I remember watching this as a boy, the 67, I think it was the 67 war on TV, of how all the surrounding nations, the Arabs, the Egyptians, Egypt, Syria, Jordan, and I can't remember if there was a fourth one, attacking Israel, and all of that unfolded, and still the tension that's there today because it was Palestinian held territory, and then because there was no place to send them, they sent Jews out of the Nazi prison camps to the land of Israel that we know it is today. And it all started there in 46, 47. The Declaration, I think, was 48 of them being on their own nationhood. But all that to say, you're reading about all of that. That's what happens in Hebrews, shortly after the writing of Hebrews, the destruction of Jerusalem. So then after Hebrews, you're going through James. Again, Rick Warren has been doing a series during this COVID-19. If you want to look at any of that, he's been using James to address people going through this time of transition and tension. And those 100, and I think he says there's 111 verses total in the book of James, those 5 chapters. But the book of James, again, is compared to the book of Proverbs. It's the Proverbs of the New Testament that Proverbs serves in the Old Testament. And then after James, Peter, 1st and 2nd Peter, and then Jude and Revelation. 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, then Jude, Revelation. So you're going up through Jude this week with your readings, and so you have a lot of great stuff to dig into. So thanks, guys. God bless you. Have a great week ahead. All right, bye.